Now, one of the high points of the State of the Nation address last night was a moving poem written and performed by Siphokazi Jonas in a year where we are mourning the death of nearly 50,000 South Africans to COVID-19. A poet rather than a praise singer reflected the mood of the country, I think. Let's take a listen to part of What Does Not Sink.
There is a flood inside our house. The water climbs the walls when we weep. It does not let us breathe. Everything is wet with grief. Before this pandemic, we would cast a funeral song into the dark like a flare, and the neighbors would come strengthen our arms as we drove the water out the door. Before grief reached our ankles, before it swept us to our knees.
Just a short clip of a very moving poem. Siphokazi is not only a performer, she's also a playwright, producer and master's graduate. In 2016, she became the first African poet to perform in LA at the Rhetoric. That's the biggest Christian spoken word festival. And she joins me now. Siphokazi, thank you so much for your time. It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you. Your poem was so incredibly moving. It was really, really beautiful. It set the tone for the entire evening. How did it come about? Did you write the poem and were then approached, or were you approached and asked to write the poem?
Thank you so much for having me, Sally. So I was approached and asked to write this poem. I was given a brief to write about COVID victims, to memorialize the people that we've lost, but also to find a way to encourage the country, despite everything that we're going through, that we will need to do.
And I think it expressed so beautifully that we cannot even mourn the way we used to. And that is how COVID has touched people in a very, very real way this year. Of course, we have to draw parallels. Last month at President Joe Biden's inauguration in the USA, Amanda Gorman, 22-year-old poet laureate, performed as well a very beautiful poem, The Hill We Climb, and also very much inspired by what her country has been going through. Have you drawn inspiration from people like her, or is your inspiration closer to home? I'm thinking of poet greats like Lebo Mashile, for example.
We have an incredible history of writers in South Africa, very, very talented, deep thinkers in terms of spoken word. And so there's just so much to draw from. We have legends like Dr. Don Matera, as you say, you've mentioned Lebo Mashile in terms of contemporary spoken word, younger poets as well. We have a very vibrant scene, in fact, in Joburg, Cape Town, Durban, smaller areas all around the country. So it's really easy to draw from the incredible tradition that we have here.
Absolutely. I was thinking, that poetry and spoken word performances right through apartheid, you've mentioned just a couple of names, but poets would use their words to highlight injustice and also call for action. I'm thinking of the late Sandile Dekene's poem, Guava Juice, which was very, very powerful. And, in an era where people go, oh, it's just words, the words don't matter, words really can inspire action. Do you see poetry having that same role in today's South Africa?
Absolutely. I think poetry does have a role to play in each moment, whether, as you've said, it's during apartheid, when we had a lot of black consciousness that actually influenced the poetry that was being performed, when people would gather in town halls, and even in terms of unions, when there were those kind of gatherings, they were used to actually rally people in order to move. So I think what we find here, especially with spoken word, is that we have young black voices, and not just young voices, in fact, that are really coming through and speaking about our experiences in the contemporary moment. And even if you think back to a space like Fees Must Fall, there were a number of performances, and spoken word was one of those. So it plays a very important role. It's critical, in fact.
So, of course, one cannot live by poetry alone, it seems. You're also a performer, you're a playwright, and you co-produced a short film that got a lot of attention, hashtag We Are Dying Here, about gender-based violence in South Africa, such a big issue that we have to keep front and centre. Does the story change the medium? Do you think, oh, this will be a poem, or this will be a play, or this play will become a film, depending on what the content is, or is it the other way around?
Well, it's quite interesting because with We Are Dying Here actually started off as a poem, which I'd written in 2018. for a campaign against gender-based violence. And as everything was happening, there were more names trending in the news and so on. We actually co-wrote a stage production. And because of COVID, we could no longer perform or tour the production. So we actually moved it to streaming, and eventually a friend approached us about it, adapting it into short forms. So I think the story can actually move and merge into what each genre demands. So we're very fortunate to move from a poem to what is now a short film.
Absolutely. I have to ask you, what's next?
Well, what's really exciting is that We Are Dying Here has been accepted at the festival. We're actually going to share that information shortly, but it's exciting to see where we're going to go with that production, because we believe we're going to be able to tell the story of gender-based violence in South Africa internationally, and we're really, really excited about that.
Such an important story to tell. Thank you so much, and best of luck with everything. That was spoken word performer, playwright and producer Siphokazi Jonas. She, of course, performed just before the State of the Nation address last night, a very moving poem.